This is Evan. He's an architect by profession, and he lives happily with his wife Karen and their 2 children. Karen also works in an art gallery because someone in the house has to appreciate culture. Evan and Karen had planned a beach trip with the children, but Evan had some urgent work and was unable to join them, so Karen took both children to the beach. She leaves for a week, and Evan stays home with his dog Just a Man, his deadlines, and the blissful silence he absolutely did not deserve. That same night, while Evan was working at home, it was raining heavily outside when his doorbell rang. When he went to open the door, 2 girls were standing there, one named Belle and the other named Genesis. Both were completely drenched in the rain. They told Evan that they had been looking for an address to attend a party, but the heavy rain had caused them to lose their way. And because they had gotten so wet, their phones had been damaged beyond use. After hearing them out, Evan let them inside to help. He gave them some towels and an iPad so they could look up the address. Upon finding it, Genesis announced that they were very far from their destination and that the cab driver had dropped them in entirely the wrong location. Classic. So Evan booked a cab for them, which was estimated to arrive in 45 minutes. Since both girls were still soaking wet, they asked Evan if they could dry their clothes in the dryer. After freshening up in his washroom, Belle and Genesis came back out to join him. Evan was making tea for them, and they all settled in the living room to talk. However, Belle and Genesis repeatedly tried to get close to Evan, which made him uncomfortable. He moved to another chair and checked his phone. Only 20 minutes left for the cab. Trying to steer the conversation somewhere neutral, Evan asked what they did for a living. They told him they were both air hostesses. Despite this, Belle and Genesis continued to try to provoke Evan, causing him to move to yet another chair. The man was practically running a musical chairs competition by himself. Evan was married, which is why he kept his distance from Belle and Genesis despite their persistent advances. The girls began telling him about their glamorous lifestyle and their travels around the country and abroad, using it as another attempt to draw him in. Meanwhile, Evan checked his phone again. The cab was only 5 minutes away. Then Genesis got up under the pretense of using the washroom and left, and Belle once again tried to seduce Evan. Just then, Evan received a call from the cab driver. The cab had arrived outside. Belle went to the washroom to get Genesis, and Evan went to retrieve their clothes from the dryer. But when Belle and Genesis did not come out of the washroom for a long time, Evan took their clothes, walked to the bathroom, and knocked on the door. Getting no response, he shielded his eyes with his hand and stepped inside. To his shock, Belle and Genesis were completely undressed, and the moment he entered, they began forcing themselves on him. This time, Evan lost his composure. What followed was a regrettable night that stretched from the bathroom to the bedroom, and by the time morning came, both women had seemingly vanished. Evan assumed they had left until he heard laughter coming from the kitchen. He walked in to find that they had turned his kitchen into what could only be described as a crime scene sponsored by chaos. Evan told them to leave immediately. Just then, his wife called on video, so he stepped outside to speak with her. After ending the call, he came back inside and again asked both of them to put on their clothes and go. Instead of leaving, Belle and Genesis began vandalizing Karen's art. Evan, furious, threatened to call the police and have them arrested, but Belle calmly informed Evan that they were both underage and that the police would arrest him for rape instead. Before Evan could process this bombshell, a friend of Karen's arrived at the door. Evan told the girls to stay out of sight and went to answer it, but Genesis chose that exact moment to wander over and cling to him, causing Karen's friend to witness the whole awkward scene, yell at Evan, and leave in disgust. Evan went back inside and gave the girls a proper scolding. This time, he actually called the police. The threat worked. Belle and Genesis panicked and agreed to leave. Evan managed to get them into his car, drove them to a house, dropped them off, and returned home to clean up the disaster they had left behind. That night, as Evan settled back into his work, he suddenly heard the sound of breaking glass. He went to investigate and found a family photo on the floor. As he bent down to pick it up, Genesis attacked him from behind, knocking him unconscious. When Evan came to, he found himself tied to a bed with ropes. He demanded to be freed. Then Belle appeared wearing his daughter's school uniform. Both girls moved closer and began removing his clothes. At that moment, Evan's wife called on video. Genesis told Evan that unless he complied with their demands, she would tell Karen everything over the call. Trapped, Evan gave in. Meanwhile, Genesis began recording everything on her phone before wandering off to the kitchen to find a snack. Apparently, even psychopaths get the munchies. While Evan was occupied, he used every bit of his strength to untie the ropes, shoved Belle off the bed, and went after Genesis. But Genesis attacked him again, and Evan was knocked out a second time. When he regained consciousness, both girls had tied him up again and were behaving like complete psychopaths, blasting loud music through headphones forced onto his ears and generally tormenting him for their own entertainment. Then Louis, the assistant of Karen, arrived at the house and rang the doorbell. When he entered, Belle and Genesis told him they were Ivan's nieces, but Louis heard a sound coming from a locked room. As he moved toward it, the girls quietly stole his inhaler from his pocket. Louis found Evan tied up with rope in the locked room. Horrified, he tried to free him, but the girls began smashing demolishing Karen's artwork in the next room. Evan urgently warned Louis not to confront them, that they were dangerous. Louis, being the brave and unfortunately unwise soul that he was, went anyway. He tried to stop them, but they ignored him and kept destroying the artwork. Louis began struggling to breathe, as he had asthma. He reached into his pocket for his inhaler only to find it gone, because the girls had already taken it and were now passing it back and forth between themselves like a game of keep away. Louis desperately tried to grab the inhaler from them. In the struggle, he slipped, and his head struck a stone. He died on the spot. The girls laughed. Ivan, witnessing all of this, now fully understood that Belle and Genesis were not just troublemakers, they were dangerously unhinged. The girls covered Louis's dead body with paper, painted over it to make it resemble a statue, disposed of the body, and then sent a message from Evan's phone to Louis's phone, engineered to make it look as though Louis and Karen had been having an affair, and that Evan had killed Louis in revenge. In a desperate attempt to contact his wife, Ivan tried to send her a message from his iPad using his feet. He was caught almost immediately. The girls threw his iPad out the window and smashed it. They proceeded to destroy everything in the house and then dug a pit in the garden. When Evan cried out for help, they held him at gunpoint, leaving him no choice but to surrender. The next day, Belle and Genesis beat Evan, tied him up, placed him in the pit, and buried him up to his neck with only his head above ground. They then introduced themselves properly. They were both psychopaths who preyed exclusively on married men, treating their crimes as a game. To make things worse, they took out his phone and showed him a video of Belle being intimate with Evan while wearing his daughter's school uniform. They titled the video Happy Father's Day, deliberately designed to make anyone who found it believe Ivan had been inappropriate with his own daughter. They left the phone beside him and walked away. Ivan, buried in the earth and running out of options, stretched out his hand and desperately tried to delete the video. He accidentally liked it instead, as one does in a crisis. Sometime later, Karen and the children returned home to find the house in complete disarray. Karen, however, did not put two and two together. She simply assumed that Ivan had thrown a wild party with his friends while she was away, and with that comfortable misunderstanding, the story ends.